What became of the women who stood beside some of the most notorious men in history? As the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, the world's attention shifted not just to the capture and trial of Nazi leaders, but also to their wives and mistresses, many of whom had lived in opulence, influence, or eerie silence during Hitler's reign. Their fates, often overshadowed by their infamous husbands, were anything but ordinary. Some met tragic ends by their own hands, others endured the humiliation of arrest and public scorn. A few tried to distance themselves from the horrors they once accepted or ignored, while others brazenly defended their men even in disgrace. This is a chilling dive into what shivering things happened to the wives of Nazi leaders after World War II. Stories of guilt, punishment, tragedy, and survival in the shadows of evil. Magda Goebbels, often dubbed the First Lady of the Third Reich, was fiercely loyal to Adolf Hitler and married to Joseph Goebbels, the regime's chief propagandist. She was more than just a spouse. Magda was deeply entwined in Nazi ideology and society. Her marriage to Goebbels was symbolic of the regime's elite unity, and their family of 6 children was often showcased as the ideal Aryan household. But as the Allies closed in on Berlin in April 1945, the image of a perfect Nazi family crumbled. While sheltered in Hitler's underground bunker, Magda and Joseph made a horrifying decision. Convinced that their children would not have a future in a world without National Socialism, Magda poisoned each of their 6 children while they slept. Soon after, she and Joseph committed suicide. This act shocked the world, not just for its brutality, but for the eerie calm with which it was executed. Only one of Magda's children survived the war, Harald Quandt, her son from a previous marriage. He was a Luftwaffe officer captured by the Allies and later became a wealthy industrialist. The rest of her legacy is stained with the chilling devotion she showed to a doomed cause, even unto death. Her actions remain one of the most disturbing examples of ideological extremism trumping maternal instinct. Eva Braun, wife of Adolf Hitler, lived much of her life in the shadows of the Nazi elite, largely hidden from public view despite being Adolf Hitler's longtime companion. Unlike Magda Goebbels, Eva was not politically active or publicly influential. She remained a background figure, deeply loyal to Hitler, but shielded from the political chaos by design. In the final days of World War II, as Soviet troops surrounded Berlin, Eva made a defining choice. She traveled to the Führer bunker to be with Hitler in his final moments. On April 29, 1945, she and Hitler were married in a short civil ceremony, less than 40 hours before their deaths. The following day, Eva took cyanide in the bunker, while Hitler shot himself. Their bodies were partially burned in the Reich Chancellery Garden by SS aides in a last effort to prevent them from becoming Soviet trophies. Eva's fate was sealed not by power, but by devotion, dying beside the man whose ideology devastated the world. Her story is often seen as a tragic footnote to Hitler's, but her voluntary role in the final act of the Third Reich adds a chilling dimension to the mythos surrounding the Nazi inner circle. Margarete Himmler, wife of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and architect of the Holocaust, presented a contrasting post-war narrative. Unlike the dramatic finales of Magda Goebbels and Eva Braun, Margarete survived the fall of the Reich and faced a far more drawn-out reckoning. Known to be a proud and reserved woman, she initially enjoyed the status that came with being part of the Nazi elite. She and Heinrich exchanged letters filled with ideology and affection. Yet, Margarete claimed ignorance of her husband's atrocities after the war. This denial would become central to her defense during the denazification process. After Germany's defeat, she was arrested by American forces and subjected to denazification tribunals. She was eventually classified as a Mitläuferin, a follower, not a leader, which spared her from harsher punishment but still came with significant consequences. Her assets were restricted, and she lived under scrutiny for years. Margaret's post-war life was quiet, marked by a steady descent into obscurity. She died in 1967, never fully disavowing her past or her husband's legacy. Her case reflects the moral ambiguity of those who stood just outside the inner circle of Nazi power, complicit, yet difficult to prosecute outright. Hedwig Potthast wasn't a wife, but she played a major role in Heinrich Himmler's life as his secret mistress. She had once worked as his secretary, and over time, they started a hidden relationship that led to the birth of 2 children. Even though she was close to one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, most people didn't know who she was during the war. After the war ended, Hedwig went into hiding to avoid being caught by the Allies. When she was eventually found, she was questioned but not charged. Since she didn't have an official role in the Nazi government, there wasn't much they could do legally. After her release, she changed her name, stayed out of the public eye, and lived a quiet life. She never spoke about Himmler again. Her story is a reminder of how some people close to power managed to slip away unnoticed.
Edda Göring was the only daughter of Hermann Göring, one of Hitler's top commanders and the head of the Luftwaffe. Her mother, Emmy Göring, was a well-known actress and socialite during the Nazi era. Edda was born into luxury and was even treated like royalty at Nazi events. But when the war ended, her life changed dramatically. After her father was captured and sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials, Edda was just a child. He committed suicide before his execution, leaving her and her mother to face the consequences alone. As she grew older, Edda tried to live a quiet life, but the shadow of her father's crimes always followed her. She studied law and worked in a hospital, but never fully escaped the legacy of her name. Edda defended her father's memory until her death in 2018, insisting that he was misunderstood, a claim many found hard to accept. Lina Heydrich was the wife of Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most feared and brutal figures in the Nazi regime. Known as the Butcher of Prague, Heydrich helped plan the Holocaust and ran Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia with an iron fist. Lina was not just a housewife. She was proud of her husband's position and fully supported his actions. After Reinhard was assassinated by Czech resistance fighters in 1942, Lina continued to defend his legacy. She received a widow's pension and remained loyal to Nazi ideals, even after the war ended. In the post-war years, she fought to keep her family's property and protect her reputation, claiming she had no knowledge of her husband's crimes. In 1976, she published a memoir where she painted Reinhard in a sympathetic light, describing him as a loving family man. Her book was widely criticized for trying to rewrite history. Lina lived until 1985, spending most of her later years in West Germany. She never renounced her husband or his beliefs. Her story shows how some individuals, even after the horrors of war were exposed, held firmly to their loyalty and chose denial over remorse. The stories of these women reveal deeper truths about life after the Third Reich. While some died in the ruins of the Nazi regime, others lived long lives, but not without facing judgment, both public and private. Many claimed ignorance, saying they didn't know what their husbands were doing. But given their close connections to power, those claims are hard to believe. The denazification process tried to sort people into categories: active supporters, followers, or those who resisted. Wives like Margarete Himmler were seen as followers and given lighter punishments. Mistresses like Hedwig Potthast were often overlooked. Meanwhile, women like Lina Heydrich never apologized and even defended their husbands, refusing to accept the guilt tied to their family names. These stories also show the emotional toll of living with such legacies. Some women seemed haunted by their past, while others ignored or twisted the truth. In post-war Germany, many tried to hide or reinvent themselves, but the shadow of Nazism was hard to escape. Together, these fates reflect how deeply the Nazi regime affected not just soldiers and leaders, but their families too. People who stood beside evil, whether blindly, willingly, or helplessly. The wives and close companions of Nazi leaders faced very different paths after the war. Some ended in tragedy, others in quiet shame, and a few in stubborn loyalty.
Whether they were true believers, passive bystanders, or willful deniers, their lives show how the horrors of Nazi Germany reached far beyond the battlefield and political offices. Their stories raise tough questions about guilt, responsibility, and the human ability to live with the past.
These women stood beside some of history's worst figures, and their fates, both haunting and revealing, remind us how evil often hides in everyday lives. Could it be hiding still?